name is Jonathan Gershon. I'm coming to you from the Mercer County Division of Public Health. I'm a health educator, and so I go around the county and I teach about a whole number of health topics. And the ARC of Mercer asked me to come and teach about their Safe Step chart. These procedures have been written as a guide for all the buildings in ARC, and the programs, the staff should use them when dealing with an assortment of potential emergencies. And their general guidelines, and individual incidents may need modifications and different guidelines. So if a staff member observes an incident, then they need to report it to their immediate supervisor. Oftentimes there's a requirement to do an incident report, and you'll see that reflected in the slides. And this chart should be distributed to all locations. The way I like to describe emergency preparedness is you don't go outside in the rain without an umbrella. Now, if you maybe it's going to rain, maybe it's not. But if it's April, it's the rainy season, I'm going to bring an umbrella with me just in case, because I don't know if it's going to rain or not. So it's important to have an emergency plan. So that's why I always say that going without an emergency plan is like walking around without an umbrella anywhere. So I want to talk about medical emergencies. If there's a medical emergency, somebody needs to call 911 right away in accordance with Danielle's law, and they need to apply first aid or CPR as needed. If a person is unconscious, which one do we need to do? We need to do CPR. Whereas if somebody is awake, you don't need to do CPR on somebody who's awake. So you're going to apply first aid. Then you're always going to tell the supervisor and do an incident report. If you're in a car, if you're in a moving vehicle, you get in an accident, somebody needs to call 911. Unless the car's on fire or you're in the middle of the road and you need to get to safety, everyone needs to stay in the car. If anybody's injured, a staff member should apply first aid, but nobody gets out of the car until the emergency personnel comes and gives the A-OK that everybody's safe. If media come chasing after you with microphones, you shouldn't give any statements. Only give statements to the police in a car crash. And that goes for most emergencies as well. So once you notify your supervisor, you'll call ARC Transportation, and they're going to tell you what to do about the vehicle and what to do going forward and give you further instruction. And then you're going to need to write it up again. With CPR, you want to check the victim, make sure that they're unconscious, check for their heartbeat, and then call 911. And then if you're CPR certified, you'll perform the CPR on them. Then you got to stay with the person. You don't want to walk away. You notify your supervisor, do another write-up. If a consumer is left at an agency or in a vehicle, you want to call 911, notify the supervisor, and check their emergency info, which may be in their app or another software. And then you want to notify the agency and notify any guardians if they're missing. And you want to supervise them, and they should only be transported in an ARC vehicle. If somebody goes missing, somebody from ARC should only be released from the agency, and only to a guardian or a family member who is approved, unless they're their own guardian, in which case you don't have to do that. If a consumer is missing from the agency and they haven't returned home, you've got to follow these steps. You need to confirm what their schedule was. Where were they supposed to be? Where is the last place that they were? You want to call 911 if necessary, if there's a danger to the person, and then you'll notify the supervisor. If you need to escalate it and bring it up to police, then show them a picture of their ID, what they look like, so that they can help search for them. And then you need to write it up. A gas leak. So a gas leak is something that can happen. A gas is what we use to heat our homes and heat many of the buildings here in New Jersey. If a gas leaks, usually it smells like rotten eggs. I don't know if you ever smelled a gas leak before, but it smells like farts. So if you smell that, it's very important that you follow these steps. You don't use any electronic devices, and that's even you don't pull the fire alarm either. You don't touch the lights or outlets, because a spark, if there's a real gas leak, a spark could ignite it and make it all blow up, and that's not good. So you don't touch those, and then you follow the evacuation plan. I have a laser pointer on here. I don't think it actually works on the screen, but pretend as if I'm pointing. And then you'll call 911, notify the supervisor, and evacuate. And you're going to want to stay outside until it's approved to go back in again. Now, hazardous materials, and this over here is a symbol that you'll find on many hazardous materials. I don't know if there's anything in this warehouse that has that label on it. There may just be. If something that has that symbol on it spills, then somebody needs to call 911 and move away from the material, and then they need to notify someone in charge, and then they got to write up about it and say that it happens. If this happens inside of a building, then you're going to need to decontaminate yourself. If there's an emergency shower, or if you can just go to the bathroom, whatever's nearby. If anything gets spilled in your clothes, you gotta change into some new clothes. Especially many of these can be very harmful for your skin, so it's important to find a way to do that. And then you want to evacuate and notify the supervisor and stay outside until it's safe to go back inside again. Biohazardous accidents. I'm going to talk about what that means. Something that's biohazardous, sometimes it can have this symbol on it. It's kind of a cool looking symbol, but it means danger. And sometimes at the doctor, you might see this symbol on a red container that looks like that. That's a sharps container. A sharps container has, used things like used needles. Some of the examples of biohazardous materials could be human blood or other fluids, or a bandage that could have blood on it, or a used needle like a syringe. So it's very important to follow proper safety
procedures, especially if it's somebody else's and not your own. If you're discarding them, there's a certain procedure that you want to follow. If it's a bodily fluid, you place clothing, paper towels in a leak-proof or puncture-proof package, label the package as a biohazard, and then you want to put it in the trash for disposal. If it's something that's sharp, you place it in a leak-proof and puncture-resistant container, and they often come in the form of those red containers in the corner. Then you close it up, you secure it, and then the container needs to be delivered to a approved sharps disposal location. You can't just put it in the trash. And then you would write that up as an incident report if that's the policy. I think it would depend on the specific incident. I'm going to talk about something serious here. Any suicidal threats or attempts need to be treated very seriously in the community, and you have to follow any community members a specific approved behavior plan, if applicable. If it doesn't talk about measures for suicidal threats, then you need to call 911 or the mobile crisis unit number. The mobile crisis unit number will be in the packet that you guys should have. It's the responsibility of the staff to make sure that it's taken care of. It's not the guardian's responsibility. And you need to contact the immediate supervisor immediately. I'll get you in just a second. And if this happens and they go to the hospital, you need to go with them, and you need to stay with them until they're admitted or discharged. And then you have to do a write-up or a report about it. If somebody dies on site, it's a very serious thing. So what a staff member needs to do is they need to call 911 first and foremost, let their supervisor know immediately. And if there's somebody's dead, then you got to keep the area clear. Do not move the person. Do not touch them. You wait for paramedics, and then you have to do a write-up and incident report, and that's the proper way to handle that. And I don't want to alarm anybody with the topics that I'm talking about. These aren't things that happen every day. But just like I said, you don't want to be out without an umbrella, and if something that's unlikely does happen, you want to be sure you're prepared. So we're going to talk a little bit, the next section is all going to be about evacuations. And some of these events are very unlikely to happen, but we want to know what to do in case they do happen. If there's a fire, you need to call 911 and get out of the building as fast as you can. I'm going to talk a little bit about how that evacuation works in just a minute. You'll want to stay outside and The person in charge needs to take attendance. You need to wait for approval to re-enter the building. So if the building is safe to re-enter, you're going to need to wait for the fire department to give the say-so. And then, of course, you always want to contact your supervisor and write down an incident report. And every agency location will have its own fire plan, so you're going to need to know your own, your particular building's fire evacuation plan. In the unlikelihood that this happens, somebody calls in a threat on the phone or by email, this is what you got to do. You got to record the number and time that they called you, and then you listen and record what they're saying to the best of your ability. And the trick here is you want to keep them talking as long as possible. Then you record the end time. If a threat came into to ARC as an email, then you screenshot that email to keep it as evidence. And you'll call 911, notify your supervisor immediately, and you'll evacuate. And I have some steps here for evacuation as well. So when you evacuate the building, in this case, you leave doors and windows open and do not touch any light switches. You want to evacuate the building, and the person in charge will calmly announce, there's a need to evacuate. Please follow evacuation procedures and leave the building. With the help from police, the person in charge will provide information for a sweep of the area, and you should prohibit the use of electronic devices during this time. All the staff needs to scan the area as they evacuate and report anything suspicious. Police and emergency responders will be responsible for conducting the search and giving an all clear to return back into the building. In the event that a suspicious object is found, it shouldn't be touched or moved. You will warn others to stay away from anything suspicious and maintain at least 100 feet clearance area away from it. When the police arrive, they're in command, so their orders should be followed during that time. You want to ensure that all of the people, the staff and the consumers are accounted for and in a safe location, and restrict staff from entering the building without police approval. And if necessary, you'll want to assemble everybody at an alternate location or have them transported. And if that happens, then you need to let guardians and anybody who's in charge of the consumers know that they've been relocated. And so that's for evacuation. And many evacuations will take that exact same form. I want to talk a little bit about biological attacks. This is different than a bomb threat. A biological attack or security breach is two different things. A biological attack is when somebody releases germs or other biological substances on purpose and to make people sick. A biosecurity breach is the intentional contamination of food, like somebody trying to poison the food with chemicals or food contaminants or cross-contamination. You'll want to call the local health department, that's us, or really your local one. So here we're in Trenton, right? So you call the Trenton Health Department. If you're in Ewing or in Hamilton, you call that health department. And you call emergency services and 911 if necessary, if it's a serious incident. Explosions. It's similar to a fire, but there's other considerations for when you evacuate. You want to make sure that you don't use elevators, and you want to make sure that you check for fire and any other hazards when you evacuate, and you want to grab an emergency kit or a first aid kit if you have enough time to do that while you're evacuating. If there's a fire, you want to pull the fire alarm in this case. You want to crawl low to the floor. When there's smoke in the room, if there's a real fire and there's smoke in the room, there's going to be more air to breathe towards the floor because the smoke is going to rise up, and so the good air is going to be at the bottom. So what you do in this case, you crawl low to the floor, you put a wet cloth, if possible, over your nose and mouth, you breathe through that, and then you use the back of your hand to feel the door. If the door is not hot, then you can reach for the handle. If the door is hot, you're gonna look for another way to get out because that handle is probably gonna burn your hand. You're not gonna be able to open it. And you shouldn't use elevators during a fire. You always wanna use the stairs. And if you catch on fire, the important part is not to panic. You wanna stop, drop, and roll. You get on the floor, you lie down, and then you roll side to side, and that will put out the fire in the worst case scenario. And you never go back inside a burning building. I don't care if it's for a person or for your favorite possession, your favorite thing. It's never safe to go back inside. It's always the job of the firemen to do that. And if for some reason you're trapped under something, what's very important is to avoid unnecessary movement. Cover your nose and mouth with cloth and try and breathe through that material. And you want to tap on a pipe or a wall and try and make some noise. But you should only shout as a last resort, because if you're in that situation, you want to preserve your breath and your voice. If there's a nuclear explosion, and this is very, 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 very unlikely, you'll want to take cover immediately below ground if possible, if any of the facilities have a basement. And you'll want to assess the situation, consider if you can get out of the area. And healthcare authorities may or may not advise to take a certain thing called potassium iodide, but it's really going to be dependent on when that happens, and you'll get instructions from somebody in charge. Sheltering in place. So this is the opposite of evacuating. When we evacuate, we're going to leave the building. When we shelter in place, we're going to stay right here. So sheltering in place is appropriate for a number of situations, including winter storms, thunderstorms if it's a serious thunderstorm, floods, tornadoes and hurricanes, earthquakes, nuclear events, hazardous material spills, even pandemics or active shooter situations. You want to avoid windows or electronics. You want to lock doors and windows, and this is when it's a full lockdown, by the way. If it's like a pandemic, you can open a window to let some air in, but if it's a lockdown, we're going to make sure once you're behind doors and locked windows and doors, make sure that everybody, staff and consumers, are behind locked doors inside the building. Nobody leaves until you get the all clear, and then you don't talk to the press. Because that's the job of the executive director, and then staff members will need to do a write-up, again, an incident report. So during emergency crisis, it's important that only the executive director of ARC talks to media people. If somebody puts a microphone in your face, you shouldn't talk to them. ARC Mercer provides prompt and accurate information using the correct channels. Any misinformation can create confusion, and sometimes if somebody puts a microphone in front of your face, you might make an incomplete or a misleading statement, and so this must be avoided. So staff isn't permitted to talk or speak to the media during emergencies. And then I'm sure you guys are familiar with this. All the buildings are locked at the ARC, so everybody has to come in through the front entrance, visitors especially. When a visitor comes, the person at the desk will say, please state your name and your purpose for your visit today. And then they got to sign in, and then you're supposed to give them a visitor's badge. I didn't get a visitor's badge today, but I hope going forward you'll have them for everybody who comes, because they need to be able to be identified. Then you're going to sign them out whenever they leave, and that should be the procedure for anybody who's not a pre-approved person on these sites. I'm going to talk, this section is going to be about natural hazards and disasters. First is earthquakes. We had an earthquake recently. I'm sure many of you remember it. I tell you that it's some basic steps of what to do during an earthquake. You're going to take cover under a table. I'd say these tables are great examples. You want to hold on to the bottom of it so that you're stable. And you want to kneel down, you'll cover your neck, because you want to, if something falls on you, you don't want it to hurt your neck. That's one of your most vulnerable spots. So you want to avoid windows, and you want to avoid any falling objects. So if you're in a workspace, consistently, and if you work around shelves and you see that a heavy object is up there and it's, it can fall really easily, you want to make sure that your space is safe. So being prepared for earthquakes means not putting something super heavy, or if it falls on your head, it's going to hurt you. And then if you're outdoors, the most important thing is to avoid poles and wires. Distance yourself from many buildings, anything that's going to fall on you. If you're in a car, then the person driving the car should drive out into an open area, and everybody needs to stay seated while it happens. And something to know about earthquakes is that after an earthquake, something comes that's called the aftershock. You'll feel the ground shaking once, and then you may feel it shaking again sometime after, because there's more shaking that comes after the first shaking. So after the earthquake, you'll evacuate the building, and you have to wait for approval to re-enter, because even if it looks safe, things might have gotten shaken up and all things can be wrong with the building. So you want to wait for the fire people, the construction people, the engineers. They all got to say it's okay. And then the person in charge takes attendance, and then they notify the supervisor, and they do an incident report. Floods, just make sure you pay attention to the TV. If it turns out you have to evacuate, you're going to want to have packed all the medications, all the clothing that you're going to need to get out of there, especially if you get soaked. You're going to want to have a spare change of clothes. Yeah, and you want to evacuate if the circumstances call for it. You're going to evacuate by car, and ARC is going to have a designated location where that will be, where people will go in the case of a flood. During a thunderstorm, if you start seeing thunder and lightning and you start hearing that thunder coming, you're going to want to pause all your activities and move inside. And then somebody who's in charge will assess the safety of people in outdoor spaces, and you can determine whether it's safe or not to stay outside, or if everybody needs to come back in. You'll notify the supervisor and write an incident report, but that's really only if there's any damages or any interruptions to the activities that are normally going on. For a hurricane or tornado, you're going to want to monitor the media, check the phone or the internet or the TV station, the weather channel, wherever you get that information. And if you have time to take shelter, the procedure is a little different than if you don't have time. So on the left here I have, if you have time to take shelter, you go into the interior of the building. So someplace like this where there's no windows, so a bathroom or a hallway where there's no windows, or glass doors also. Glass doors that can be dangerous during a hurricane or tornado. And then you take a similar position as if there was an earthquake, hands over the neck. That's going to protect you the most. Somebody should take attendance, do the write-up, notify the supervisor. If there's no time to take shelter and it's happening right then and there, you got to just avoid windows if you can. You can crouch up against a wall, like a strong wall, or get under a table. And then after it happens, everyone, you take attendance, you see where everybody is, and then you notify the supervisor and you write it up. For winter storms, ARC will post about delayed openings on the website, and you want to monitor any messaging systems, phones, for messages about cancellations or early closure. So what happens if the power goes out? If the power goes out, then you need a shelter in place and ensure that everybody's safe, and you need to use a flashlight. If there's a threat to anybody's safety, then you'll follow the evacuation like I talked about, going outside and waiting for approval to get back inside. If there's a refrigerator at your location, it's got to stay closed because you don't want all your food to spoil while the power is out. Somebody needs to be notified, and then you need to write up not just an incident report, but you also got to put in a work order for the electric to get fixed. If there's a plumbing failure, so what happens if like a main water valve breaks? So if a pipe breaks inside the building, you want to shut off the main valve at the primary control by turning it in a clockwise direction. If it's a device like a toilet or a sink or even a washer or like a washing machine, it's going to have a valve close to it. You'll turn that to clockwise or to the right, and that will help that. If there's any damaged clothing or other items or articles, you relocate them to a place where they're not making a mess. Then you notify the supervisor, you submit the work order, and you put an incident report in, because somebody's got to come and fix it. We're going to talk a little bit about some more other safety threats. So the United States uses the National Terrorism Advisory System, and there are two levels of concern here. One warns of a credible terrorist threat against the United States. That's called an elevated alert. And then there's imminent alerts, which is a credible, specific, and impending terrorist threat. And during this time, you'll want to just monitor media like you would for a weather event, report suspicious behavior, and the supervisor will decide on any closures. During this time, it's especially important that all visitors get ID checked and get escorted to wherever they need to be. It's important to review the plans that you have in your buildings, and during these elevated threat alert times, you might have nervous family calling in because they're wondering what's going on, so you got to be prepared for anxious family to call in. And then you just want to be aware of your surroundings more than you usually would. So if there's a weapon on the property, you're going to want to obtain as much information as possible about it. Find out who has it, who has the weapon, what kind of weapon is it, where the location of the weapon. But the important part is to keep everybody calm, and the first step to do that is to not announce that a weapon has been found in the building. 911 needs to get called immediately, and you need to notify the supervisor immediately. Make every effort to keep eyes on a person who's suspected of having a weapon until help arrives, so that you can point them out to police. It's best to have the police officer talk to that person, confront them directly, and conduct the search of the person who's suspected of having the weapon. And then you'll want to let the police take custody of that object. You want to treat all firearms as if they're loaded, so avoid handling any weapon. And you want to make every effort to secure the area so that nobody is near or around or is able to touch or pick up the weapon. You want to reduce the risk of injury when it comes to these weapons, and promote your own personal safety, because sometimes weapons are disguised like a pen or a belt buckle or a piece of jewelry. It could look like that, and so you want to just be careful. And then you'll ask the police with police permission for a photograph, and to send you a copy of the photograph to the weapon. And then you need to do, it's especially important to do a written incident report. Okay. Active shooter. So I know there's a lot of words in this slide, but I'll walk you guys through it because it's similar to some of the other procedures that I just talked about, namely shelter in place. And I added the shelter in place procedure again, just to refresh our memory. You know, this is when lockdown happens. You want to avoid all the windows, lock all the doors, make sure everyone's locked inside and is safe, and nobody leaves until all clear. Don't talk to the media. Staff should not permit anybody to leave the secure areas. Emergency personnel, not the supervisor, will come and check the building, and everyone needs to remain in place until the situation is deemed safe. And incident report will be completed, and then the media is going to come knocking, and at that time only the executive director is going to make any statements. I'm going to talk about workplace violence. This is another serious topic. The agency and the responsibility of its managers and all its employees is to maintain a workplace free from threats and acts of violence. The ARC provides a safe workplace for employees, consumers, and visitors to the workplace. Each employee and everyone with we come into contact in the workplace should be treated with courtesy and respect. The agency will not tolerate any type of workplace violence committed by or against employees, and employees are prohibited from making threats or engaging in violent activities. Some examples of prohibited conduct: causing physical injury, threatening remarks, acting in an aggressive or hostile manner, and causing somebody fear or emotional distress, and damaging somebody else's property or damaging company property, or possessing a weapon like we just talked about. That's not allowed. And also anything relating to sexual harassment or domestic violence is also considered to be workplace violence and not allowed at all. And these are some examples. It's not everything, and there are other cases that may still apply, but this is a good sampling of things that are treated as workplace violence and very, very much not okay. And so the safety protocol is, if when you see an example of workplace violence, you assess the threat, you make a judgment, you contact the supervisor, the person in charge, and then you call 911 if there's any immediate danger. And then you always take threats seriously. Somebody says, oh, this person is, or there's violence being done against me, or somebody's being aggressive, you got to take that absolutely seriously. If somebody calls in a telephone threat, it's similar back to when I showed the slide about bomb threats. You want to record the number and the time of the call, and you want to call your supervisor or call 911 and follow this emergency plan if there's an imminent danger. If you think somebody's threatening to come and hurt somebody, you want to make sure you cooperate with police and assist them in helping you with the problem. You want to notify guardians. You want to notify guardians if it's necessary. And if the threat is carried out, you have to care for the injured. So you want to always make sure your first aid kit is within reach when you're on the sites. And then you want to make sure everyone's accounted for. Make a head count for everyone who's on, and make a head count for everybody who's off the site, because you want to make sure everybody's safe even in the locations that you're not at. And then you need to write it up. I'll talk briefly about cybersecurity. Some people in ARC use devices, computers, to conduct business. It's the practice of defending your computers from malicious attacks, people trying to take advantage of the personal information that we have stored here. Cybersecurity threats occur when somebody gets unauthorized access to computers. So a few things about cybersecurity tips, a few tips. You're gonna wanna make sure your software is updated and up to date. You want to use antivirus protection and firewall. You want to make sure that your password is strong. You want to change your password regularly. These two people in the corner here, they're talking about their passwords. You don't share your passwords with anybody on your computers. Then you also want to make use of two-factor or multi-factor authentication. That's when you log into your account and then suddenly you gotta, something will pop up on your phone to make sure that it's you. That's what two-factor authentication is. You'll want to avoid any scams. People are going to try and scam you. So any phishing scams, phone calls. Protect your personal information. Don't be posting personal identifiers and sensitive information online. And you want to make sure that your phones and your mobile devices are secure. You want to make sure that you're backing up your data, whether that's onto your hard drive or into the cloud. And then you don't want to use company devices with any public Wi-Fi, free Wi-Fi, because people can access those networks, get into your devices. It's not good. And you want to not open or respond to any suspicious emails. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about communicable disease.
Communicable diseases are when an infection is transmitted by direct or indirect contact with somebody who is affected by that infection. So for COVID-19, the symptoms can be mild to severe, sometimes even fatal if the person has poor immune system or certain conditions which can lead to that. The typical symptoms include coughing and shortness of breath and fevers, among many others. Those are just the three most common. Hand washing is very important. If soap is not available, you want to use hand sanitizer containing at least 60% alcohol. Cough and sneeze into your sleeve. It's important to do proper coughing etiquette. And if you use a tissue, you want to throw it away and then use hand sanitizer immediately. And then you want to have proper ventilation. I see you guys have a lot of air conditioning here in the warehouse. It's important to have proper ventilation, especially when there's sicknesses going around, because it cycles clean air through and keeps people from getting sick as easily. Part 2 of this is that you want to avoid touching your face. If you're sick, don't avoid touching your face, because you're going to touch all your germs and then you're going to spread it on all the things you touch. If you are not sick and you touch all the things that germs are on and then you touch your face, that's going to get you sick. So avoid touching your face, try not to get sick and something's going around. And then all staff should be doing screenings and wearing masks when there's a COVID outbreak. There should be more care taken to clean and disinfect things in the areas that people are working in. And if somebody tests positive, then supervisors should be informed. If there's a positive result, then there should be a write-up about that. Blood pathogen exposure. So if you get exposed to somebody else's blood or somebody else's cut on their arm, then you need to immediately clean the area by washing exposed skin and cuts with soap and water. Everybody involved should visit a health facility of some kind. It doesn't have to be the hospital, but it should be some kind of health facility. And then you need to notify HR. I've got the number here for you guys, and that will be in the slides. Infection control. I'm going to do a little crash course on infection control. This is something that I know a little bit about working for the health department. Infection requires 3 things to work. You need to have a pathogen. A pathogen is something like a virus or a bacteria or a fungus, and that's the thing that makes you sick. Then you need to have a host. That's the person who gets sick. And then you need the correct conditions. That's the environment. You need the conditions for it to be transmitted. I'm going to talk about a few of those here. Infection control is about preventing the transmission of infectious organisms and managing the infections if they occur. Infectious agents can be bacteria or viruses or even fungi. Contact transmission involves transmission of an infectious agent by hand or contact with blood or boogers or bodily substances. Whereas direct contact transmission, that's when you're directly touching somebody or the infectious agents are transferred from one person to another, like if somebody rubs a bleeding cut on you somehow. Whereas the indirect transmission is when somebody touches an object and they're sick, and then somebody who's healthy touches that same object and gets germs from the object. So here I have like a pillow that's covered in germs, and somebody else touches the pillow. That's indirect transmission, and that can also be a person. If somebody's sick, wipes their nose on somebody's shirt, and then another person comes and touches that shirt, that's indirect transmission. And so you want to treat all blood and bodily substances as if they are infectious. So make sure you're exercising caution when handling that kind of thing. Abuse and neglect. Abuse and neglect are 2 different things. So abuse can come in the form of physical, emotional, or psychological. There can be some visible signs. There can be behavioral signs of abuse. Talk a little bit more about them. Some visible signs of abuse are cuts, bruising, and other visible signs. Behavioral signs could be
fearfulness, or somebody being withdrawn, or if they make a comment that indicates to you that they're being abused, is saying, somebody's treating me bad, this person is mean to me all the time, then it's definitely something to take note of. And if you hear about this, you want to notify the supervisor immediately and write up about it in an incident report. Neglect can be physical, emotional, medical, or with supervision. Some of the signs of neglect could be an unclean environment, poor hygiene care, medical issues that aren't addressed, or accidents from poor supervision. And in these cases, if you observe neglect taking place over time, then you need to notify a supervisor and write an incident report as soon as you can. And then of course, there's exploitation. Exploitation is another thing altogether. Exploitation is the misuse of an individual's money, goods, or body for the benefit of the caregiver, and it's a misuse of power on the caregiver's part. And it should never be done. If you think you see somebody being exploited or you see exploitation, you got to notify a supervisor and write up that report immediately. On that note, thank you so much for having me. This really was a treat, you know. Yeah, Aster told me it couldn't be done. I believed in you guys from the start, and I had a great time coming to talk to you all. So thank you.